What if the gods of old weren't myths, but memories? Across ancient texts, temple ruins, and forbidden scrolls lies a forgotten pantheon. Gods once worshipped, feared, and revered. But who tried to erase them? And why? In this video, we uncover the shocking truth behind the ancient deities hidden by history, silenced by empires, and buried beneath new religions. From Africa to Mesopotamia, traces of these powerful beings still echo. Join us as we expose the forces that rewrote divine history and ask, what else have they hidden from us? Get ready for a journey into the erased truths of the ancient world. For thousands of years, humanity worshipped a wide range of gods of the sky, earth, fertility, wisdom, and war. These deities were central to the identity, culture, and worldview of ancient civilizations across Africa, Mesopotamia, the Americas, Asia, and Europe. But over time, many of these gods vanished from mainstream memory. Their names were wiped from temple walls, their rituals demonized, their myths replaced, and their worship outlawed. This wasn't by accident. It was part of a deliberate campaign to reshape spiritual history. So the question is, who tried to erase these ancient gods, and why? 1. The rise of monotheism, a spiritual overhaul. One of the most powerful forces behind the erasure of ancient gods was the rise of monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. As these Abrahamic faiths spread, they came into direct conflict with the polytheistic beliefs that had dominated much of the ancient world. In the Old Testament, the God of Israel commands his people to destroy idols and tear down altars dedicated to foreign gods like Baal, Asherah, and Molech. These weren't just religious reforms. They were acts of spiritual warfare. The goal was to eliminate competing divine beings from memory. When Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, it continued this process. Pagan temples were closed or repurposed. Sacred groves and shrines were burned. Festivals dedicated to gods like Saturn, Mithras, or Isis were outlawed or absorbed into Christian holidays. This was not merely evangelism, it was systematic replacement. In the Islamic world, similar trends unfolded. Pre-Islamic Arabian gods, such as Al-Lat, Manat, and Al-Uzza, once revered across the Arabian Peninsula, were denounced and forgotten after the Prophet Muhammad's unification of Mecca under the banner of monotheism. These goddesses were erased from religious memory, surviving only in obscure archaeological records and oral traditions. 2. Colonialism and the demonization of indigenous gods. When European powers colonized Africa, the Americas, Asia, and the Pacific Islands, they didn't just bring political domination. They brought religious and cultural imperialism. Christian missionaries, backed by colonial governments, saw traditional belief systems as heathen, barbaric, and demonic. In Africa, powerful gods like Ogun, Shango, Mawu, and Nyam, who had ruled the spiritual lives of millions, were declared evil spirits or primitive superstitions. Sacred rituals were banned, shrines destroyed, and practitioners persecuted. In many cases, entire generations were forced to abandon ancestral gods in favor of the Christian Trinity. The Americas witnessed an even more brutal erasure. When Spanish conquistadors invaded the Aztec and Inca empires, they decimated temples dedicated to gods like Quetzalcoatl, Huitzilopochtli, and Inti. Indigenous priests were executed, and sacred texts, such as the Maya codices, were burned in mass bonfires. These were intentional acts meant to cut people off from their divine heritage and install a new spiritual order. Even in Asia, where Hinduism and Buddhism held strong, colonial powers often mocked or suppressed native religions. British colonizers dismissed Indian deities as false gods and tried to replace them with Christian doctrines. This colonial erasure was not just about religion. It was a tactic of control. To dominate a people fully, You must erase their gods, rewrite their past, and replace their divine story with one that serves your empire. 3. The role of academia and the myth of primitive religion. While spiritual suppression often came through religious institutions and empires, another more subtle form of erasure happened in the academic world. During the 18th and 19th centuries, European scholars began classifying religions in evolutionary terms, placing monotheism at the top and indigenous or polytheistic systems at the bottom. Ancient gods were described as primitive, mythical, or superstitious. African deities were rarely taken seriously, treated instead as folklore or tribal fantasy. Native American cosmologies were reduced to fairy tales. The gods of ancient Babylon, Egypt, and Canaan were portrayed as bloodthirsty or foolish compared to the supposedly enlightened Christian worldview. This scholarly bias created an intellectual justification for ignoring or belittling non-Abrahamic gods. It wasn't just that these deities were forgotten, they were systematically devalued. Their myths were viewed as less meaningful. Their wisdom, rituals, and sacred symbols were treated as cultural relics rather than legitimate spiritual insights. Modern archaeology has helped to rediscover many of these gods, but even now, they are often studied only as historical curiosities rather than living spiritual forces. The gods were erased not just from worship, but from relevance. 4. Religious rewriting. Gods transformed into demons. Another insidious method of erasure was demonization. Some ancient gods were not merely forgotten. They were deliberately recast as demons or devils. Take Baal, for example. Once a revered storm and fertility god in the Canaanite pantheon, he was later portrayed in biblical texts as a false god and enemy of Yahweh. In medieval demonology, Baal became a prince of hell, a demonic figure with horns, bat wings, and terrifying power. The Greek god Pan, associated with nature, fertility, and wildness, was gradually transformed into a devil-like figure in Christian symbolism. His horns, goat legs, and sexual energy were repurposed to represent Satan. Similarly, Lilith, a powerful goddess or spirit in Mesopotamian and Hebrew traditions, was rewritten as a child-stealing demon in later Jewish lore. These transformations were not coincidental. They were spiritual propaganda, designed to terrify people away from old beliefs and secure loyalty to the new order. By turning gods into monsters, religious systems made the past appear dangerous, forbidden, and cursed. 5. Modern erasure. Technology, apathy, and the loss of ancestral memory. Even today, the erasure of ancient gods continues, though now it's more passive. In a world dominated by screens, consumerism, and individualism, traditional spiritual systems are rapidly fading. Younger generations grow up without knowing the names of their ancestors' gods. Languages that carried sacred chants are dying. Rituals once passed down orally are disappearing. In Africa, for example, many traditional belief systems are either marginalized or practiced in secret. Elders who once preserved spiritual knowledge are dying without successors. In the Americas, efforts to revive native traditions face resistance from both religious institutions and modern apathy. The erasure is no longer carried out by swords and fires, but by silence, forgetfulness, and disconnection. However, there is hope. Across the globe, a spiritual reawakening is taking place. People are rediscovering ancient paths, reviving old names, rebuilding temples, and reclaiming the sacred stories of their ancestors. From the Afro-Brazilian candomblé to the revival of Norse paganism and the resurgence of Kemetic spirituality, the ancient gods are stirring once more. 6. Why were these gods erased? The deeper truth. Ultimately, the erasure of ancient gods was about more than religious competition. It was about power. To erase a god is to erase a people's identity. It's to sever the spiritual thread that connects them to their land, ancestors, and cosmic purpose. By replacing ancient gods with new ones, empires and religions didn't just change belief. They redefined reality. This spiritual colonization meant that people now saw themselves through foreign eyes. They forgot their original stories, their divine purpose, and their sacred traditions. They were taught that their gods were false, their wisdom was worthless, and their rituals were wrong. But what if those ancient gods were not simply myths or demons, but powerful archetypes, ancestral energies, or real spiritual forces? What if their erasure was meant to keep humanity spiritually disconnected and easily controlled? For thousands of years, humanity lived in close communion with the divine. From the deserts of Kemet to the forests of West Africa, from the Andes to the Indus Valley, gods were not distant figures, but living presences in everyday life. They spoke through dreams, danced in rituals, and guided kings and commoners alike. These gods were honored in songs, carved into stone, and passed on through sacred stories. But somewhere along the way, many of these gods were forgotten. Today, their names are rarely spoken. Their temples are in ruins. Their symbols lie buried beneath centuries of dust. And yet, the gods await remembering. This isn't just poetic language. It is a spiritual reality, a deep call that echoes in the bones of those who seek ancestral truth, who question the mainstream narratives, and who feel a yearning for something ancient and eternal. In this article, we explore what it means to remember the forgotten gods, and why that remembrance matters more than ever. 1. Memory is sacred. Why forgetting the gods was no accident. To forget a god is not just to lose a name. It's to sever a link in the cosmic chain that binds humans to the spiritual realm. In traditional cultures, gods were part of the community. They guarded rivers, blessed harvests, gave visions to prophets, and demanded justice. They were the soul of a people. Forgetting them didn't happen by accident. It was often the result of conquest, colonization, religious replacement, and intellectual dismissal. New gods replaced the old, and with each transition, spiritual memory was disrupted. Colonialism played a particularly devastating role in this erasure. When European empires expanded into Africa, the Americas, and Asia, they sought not only to control land, but to dominate minds. Missionaries condemned indigenous gods as demons. Sacred rituals were labeled witchcraft. Priests and spiritual leaders were persecuted or silenced. Shrines were destroyed. Oral traditions were banned. This was spiritual warfare. The goal was to erase the old gods so completely that future generations wouldn't even know they existed. And in many cases it worked, but not entirely. 2. The echoes that remain, traces of the forgotten. Even when gods are erased from formal religion, they rarely disappear completely. They live on in folktales, proverbs, rhythms, and symbols. They survive in festivals that seem secular, in names passed down through families, and in dreams that carry echoes of ancestral spirits. In Africa, the Yoruba orishas like Ogun, Shango, and Ashen were carried across the Atlantic by enslaved Africans and survived through Candomblé, Santeria, and Vodou. These deities adapted to survive under oppression, wearing Christian disguises but holding onto their true essence. In Egypt, the gods of Kemet, Ra, Isis, Osiris, Thoth, still whisper through hieroglyphs and hidden knowledge systems. In Native American traditions, the spirits of the land still communicate with elders and shamans through visions and sacred sites. In India, the Vedic gods, although reshaped over millennia, still appear in temple rituals and mythic texts. These fragments are reminders that the gods are not gone. They are waiting for us to remember. 3. Why the gods matter today. Some may ask, why does any of this matter? Isn't mythology just a relic of the past? Haven't we evolved beyond needing ancient deities? The answer is both spiritual and psychological. On a spiritual level, remembering the gods reconnects us to the divine rhythms of the universe. These gods embody cosmic forces: love, war, fertility, justice, time, creation, and transformation. They are expressions of energies that still shape our world. To forget them is to forget how to live in harmony with nature, with spirit, and with self. On a psychological level, gods are archetypes, deep symbols that mirror aspects of our inner world. When we reconnect with ancient deities, we awaken parts of ourselves that modern life often suppresses: intuition, courage, connection to ancestry, and reverence for the earth. In a world plagued by spiritual emptiness, ecological collapse, and identity crises, remembering the gods offers healing. It offers meaning. For the process of remembering, a sacred journey. To remember the gods is not simply to read about them in books. It is a sacred act of reconnection. It involves learning, yes, but also feeling, dreaming, honoring, and living in alignment with ancestral wisdom. Here are several steps involved in this sacred process. A. Research and relearning. Start by uncovering the names, roles, stories, and symbols of the gods of your heritage. Who were the deities your ancestors once called upon? What were their domains? What myths are associated with them? This research may involve reading ancient texts, listening to elders, studying oral traditions, or exploring archaeological discoveries. B. Ritual and practice. Once you know who the gods are, seek to engage with them. This could be through prayer, meditation, music, offerings, or traditional dance. Recreate sacred spaces in your home. Visit nature. Many gods dwell in rivers, mountains, and forests. Ritual grounds memory in the body and spirit. See language and song. Many ancient gods are remembered through language. Reclaiming indigenous or sacred languages can unlock layers of meaning lost in translation. Songs, chants, and mantras carry vibrational memory, powerful keys to awakening forgotten connections. D. Dream and intuition. In many traditions, gods communicate through dreams. Pay attention to symbols, animals, voices, and visions that arise in altered states of consciousness. The gods often return through the subconscious, especially when consciously invited. E. Community and legacy. Don't walk the path alone. Find others on a similar journey. Rebuilding sacred memory is not just a personal act, it's a communal one. Form study groups, build altars, create spaces where ancestral wisdom can be shared and passed on. 5. Barriers to remembering and how to overcome them. The path to remembering is not easy. There are many forces, internal and external, that resist this awakening. A. Religious guilt. Many people, especially in formerly colonized regions, feel fear or guilt around honoring ancestral gods. They've been taught it's wrong or even dangerous. Overcoming this requires decolonizing the mind and reclaiming spiritual autonomy. B. Modern disconnection. In a fast-paced, tech-driven world, it's easy to feel removed from sacred traditions. But this is precisely why remembering is urgent. The gods remind us that we are more than machines. We are vessels of spirit. See, loss of oral tradition, colonial disruption, and generational trauma have caused many lineages to lose their spiritual knowledge. But the divine always leaves clues. By researching across cultures, collaborating with scholars and elders, and trusting intuition, we can begin to reconstruct what was lost. 6. The gods are evolving too. It's important to note that remembering the gods doesn't mean returning to a frozen past. Gods evolve as humanity evolves. While their core energies remain, the way we engage them can grow. Modern practitioners are finding new ways to connect through music, art, social justice work, ecological activism, and digital platforms. Some are reviving old rituals. Others are creating new ones based on ancient principles. The gods are not static. They are living energies that adapt to every age. 7. Reclaiming identity through the divine. At the heart of remembering is a deep act of reclaiming identity. For people of African descent, indigenous heritage, or other historically oppressed communities, the erasure of ancestral gods was a way to erase dignity and spiritual power. To remember is to resist. It's to say, my story did not begin with slavery, colonization, or conquest. My people walked with gods. My ancestors built civilizations guided by divine wisdom. My spirit is sacred. This remembrance is revolutionary. 8. The gods are calling. Will you answer? In whispers and visions, in dreams and synchronicities, the gods call us. They do not demand blind worship. They seek connection, remembrance, and reverence. They offer power, not to dominate others, but to awaken the divine within. They are waiting at the thresholds of temples, forests, and hearts. Their stories are still alive, waiting to be retold, reimagined, and re-embodied. All that's required is the courage to remember. The sacred future begins with memory. As we face a future full of uncertainty, climate change, spiritual crisis, cultural amnesia, remembering the gods is not about nostalgia. It is about survival. It is about grounding ourselves in eternal truths so we can move forward with wisdom, strength, and soul. The gods await remembering, not as relics, but as allies, teachers, ancestors, and reflections of the divine spark within us. They have waited long enough. Now it is our turn to listen, honor, and remember. Final call to action. If this message resonates with your spirit, start your journey. Learn the names. Speak the prayers. Light the candle. Rebuild the altar. Share the stories. The gods are watching, and they rejoice when we remember. The stories of these ancient gods may have been buried, but their legacy still whispers through time. As we've seen, powerful forces worked hard to erase them, yet truth has a way of surviving. Now it's up to us to question, uncover, and remember what was almost forgotten. If this video opened your eyes, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more hidden truths from the ancient world. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think was the real reason behind this divine erasure? Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and never stop digging for the truth.